The night air was crisp above Fifth Avenue, where the rooftop of the Zenith Wellness Club glittered like a crystal temple suspended over New York City. Guests in evening gowns and tailored suits gathered around the open-air stage glasses of champagne, in hand their murmurs blending with the soft chime of wind bells swaying against bamboo plants placed carefully along the edges. At the center of it all stood Juliet May, the billionaire face of modern Tai Chi. 41, elegant, poised her every movement, exuding a graceful control that had become her brand. Cameras hovered, influencers streamed, investors applauded. This was her night, the launch of her Breath and Balance Foundation, a global initiative blending wellness, mindfulness, and martial artistry into a lucrative empire. And then, as if to crown her performance with spectacle, Juliet turned her eyes toward the quiet figure mopping the polished wooden floor near the stage. "Hey, you, care to spar for fun with me?" The words fell like a stone into a still pond. Laughter rippled across the rooftop. Some chuckled at the absurdity, others shifted uneasily. But Juliet's smile was bright, daring, tinged with mischief. The janitor froze, then slowly raised his head. Mason Reed, 40 years old, rugged but unassuming, dressed in faded maintenance overalls, his dark hair falling loose around a face carved by years of hardship. His eyes, steady, silent, unreadable, met hers, with the calm of a man who had seen storms greater than this. "Come on," Juliet added lightly, gesturing toward the mat. "Just for fun. Let's show our friends a demonstration of harmony." Mason's 9-year-old daughter Maya sat cross-legged near a potted bonsai, her backpack hugged tightly against her chest. She watched her father, her young face a mixture of curiosity and unease. The crowd leaned in. Phones lifted. No one expected the janitor to agree. No one expected him to step forward to lay aside his mop and place it carefully against the bamboo railing. But he did. The rooftop grew still. Juliet, smiling, raised her hands into a Tai Chi posture, fluid, deliberate. Mason mirrored nothing. He simply stood, shoulders relaxed, feet grounded, his breath measured like the tide. Then Juliet moved. A graceful push forward, a gentle testing of balance, Tai Chi's famed push hands drill. Mason did not resist. He shifted almost imperceptibly, absorbing her energy, guiding it into emptiness. She tried again, faster, a sweeping arc meant to unbalance him. He flowed with it like water around a rock. The guests gasped as Juliet, elegant and precise, suddenly found herself chasing shadows. Mason's movements were so subtle, they were nearly invisible, yet undeniable. And then, the moment that silenced everyone, Juliet advanced with a full step. Certain she could pin him, Mason pivoted, redirected her wrist with the slightest touch, and left her perfectly upright, untouched, but her own momentum dissolved into nothing. He hadn't countered. He hadn't humiliated. He had simply returned her to balance. A stunned hush fell. Cameras captured the impossible contrast, the billionaire master of Tai Chi outshone not by force, but by a janitor's invisible mastery. Before the astonishment could fade, Cole Barrett, the club's celebrity trainer, stepped forward, eyes blazing with pride. "That was cute," he sneered. "But let's see how your janitor friend handles someone who actually fights." Without waiting for permission, Cole lunged a flurry of sharp, controlled strikes, too fast, too aggressive for a casual demonstration. Gasps erupted. Maya cried out softly. But Mason was already there, not striking back, not even tensing. Each blow found only emptiness. A sidestep, a subtle shift of weight, a turn of the shoulder, and Cole stumbled breathless, nearly crashing to the floor. Mason's hand caught him, steadying him before the fall. The rooftop was frozen in disbelief. Juliet's smile faltered. Cole's chest heaved. And Mason. He simply released the trainer's arm and stepped back, eyes calm, voice low. No one learns anything when they're on the ground. For a heartbeat, the city itself seemed to pause. If you're already hooked by this unexpected duel of strength and humility, don't look away now. What happened next shook reputations, exposed hidden pasts, and changed lives forever. Stay with this story, because the deeper you go, the more you'll understand why a single father, once invisible, became the man who redefined harmony. The rooftop had returned to its curated elegance, but Mason Reed's presence lingered like a shadow no one could ignore. The champagne glasses clinked again, the investors murmured about market expansion, and Juliet May slipped back into her role as host. But something had shifted. Guests whispered not about her Tai Chi demonstration, but about the janitor who had stood like a mountain, moved like water, and caught her trainer mid-collapse. Mason, however, was already gone. He had picked up his mop, nodded politely to the nearest security guard, and disappeared into the stairwell without a word. For him, the night was not about spectacle. It was about finishing his shift, getting his daughter home, and paying another week's rent. Down in the maintenance corridor, the fluorescent lights flickered overhead. Maya clutched his hand, her backpack swinging against her side. "Daddy," she whispered, "why did everyone look at you like that?" Mason glanced down at her. Her eyes were bright, searching. "Because people notice things when they don't expect them," he said gently. "But you didn't even fight," she insisted. "You just moved. That's the point, sweetheart. Fighting isn't always about winning. Sometimes it's about keeping balance, even when someone wants to push you." Maya nodded slowly, chewing on the idea, as children do when they sense there's more meaning than words can hold. Later that night, as he tucked her into bed in their small Queens apartment, 2 rooms, thin walls, the faint hum of traffic outside. Mason lingered for a moment, watching her fall asleep. Her hair fanned across the pillow, and for a heartbeat, he saw her mother's face reflected there. It had been 9 years since the car accident. 9 years since he had promised his late wife he would raise their daughter with love, patience, and a steadiness she could trust. To everyone else, he was invisible. A janitor with a tired smile, an army veteran. Nobody asked about a man doing his best to survive. But to Maya, he was everything. That was enough most nights. The next morning, Mason returned to Zenith Wellness to clock in for his early shift. He kept his head down, avoiding the curious stares of a few employees who had seen last night's spectacle. The gossip spread fast. "Did you see him?" He made Juliet stumble. Cole nearly fell flat on his face. "That janitor? What's his deal?" Mason ignored it all. He wasn't there to impress. He was there to work. But others were not so willing to forget. Sloan Whitaker Zenith's COO had watched the rooftop incident with narrowed eyes. Slick suit, sharp tongue, and a reputation for turning every narrative into PR gold. Sloan saw opportunity, a billionaire sparring with a janitor viral gold, but only if told the right way. By mid-morning, he had already instructed the media team to cut a highlight reel, Juliet May, dazzling the janitor fumbling into frame, Cole theatrically stumbling as if part of a staged demo. The message was clear: Juliet's brilliance, not Mason's balance. Meanwhile, Juliet sat in her glass-walled office overlooking the city. Her fingers drummed against her desk, replaying the memory. She had trained for 20 years, built an empire on Tai Chi's philosophy, turned it into retreats, books, and billion-dollar wellness partnerships. Yet one unassuming man in maintenance overalls had reminded her of something she couldn't name, something she had lost along the way. Her assistant entered, tablet in hand. The video's trending already. Thousands of views in the first hour. Juliet frowned. "Show me." The clip played. She looked flawless, her movements perfect, her smile radiant. Mason was barely visible, his subtle shifts lost in the edit. Cole's near fall was cut out entirely. Mr. Whitaker insisted this is the angle we should promote. The assistant explained, "It keeps the focus on you." Juliet hesitated. She should have been pleased. The optics were flawless. The investors would love it. And yet, she felt a knot in her chest. What had actually happened on that rooftop wasn't captured at all. What the crowd had truly witnessed was erased. That afternoon, as Mason mopped the marble lobby, a voice interrupted. "Excuse me, are you the man from last night?" He turned to see a woman in her 30s, short black hair tucked behind one ear, glasses perched on her nose. She carried a notebook and a small camera bag slung over her shoulder. "Name's Grace Land," she said, offering her hand. "Independent journalist. I saw the stream before it got edited. I'd like to know your story." Mason paused, leaning on the mop handle. "There's no story," he replied. "I'm just a janitor." Grace tilted her head. "Janitors don't move like that. Trust me, I've been covering martial arts for years. What you did wasn't luck." His jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "Whatever you think you saw, it's not for print." "Please." Grace studied him, then scribbled something in her notebook anyway. "Fair enough. But if you ever decide to tell the truth, the world deserves to hear it." She left him with that thought, and it clung to him like a shadow long after she was gone. By the end of the day, Mason walked Maya home from school, her small hand tucked into his larger one. She chattered about spelling tests and playground games, but he barely heard her. Grace's words echoed in his head. The world deserves to hear it. But what did the world deserve? The truth about who he had been, what he had done, and why he now hid in plain sight, or the quiet dignity of a man who no longer sought recognition. As they crossed a busy intersection, Mason squeezed his daughter's hand gently, grounding himself in the only truth that mattered to him. She was safe, she was smiling, and she was his reason for staying invisible. Still deep down, he knew invisibility was a fragile shield. And last night's rooftop challenge had cracked it wide open. By sunrise the next day, the rooftop had become a battlefield of perception. Not fists or forms now, but edits, captions, and hashtags. The digital world was faster than any punch, and Sloan Whitaker knew exactly how to wield it. The highlight reel he had ordered was polished and posted before most New Yorkers had their first coffee. The title blared, "Billionaire Tai Chi Master inspires guests with stunning rooftop demo." The clip ran under 30 seconds. Juliet May's serene smile, her graceful hands flowing like silk, her posture rooted, yet elegant. The janitor's presence was cropped to the margins, a blur of faded uniform and lowered eyes. Cole's near fall was sliced away. The crowd's gasps were recut as applause. Within hours, the video had 100,000 views. By noon, it had 1 million. By evening, news outlets were embedding it into their wellness segments, praising Juliet's mastery, her brand, her commitment to balance. But those who had been on the rooftop knew they had seen something very different. And whispers began to spread. Mason heard the buzz as soon as he arrived for his evening shift. 2 young trainers leaned against the reception desk, scrolling their phones. "Man, did you see this one?" whispered. "They cut the whole thing." "That janitor? What's his name?" "Mason. He's basically invisible." "Good," the other snorted. "Better for him. If they'd shown the real deal, Cole would have quit in shame." Mason pushed his mop bucket past them without a word, but their voices lingered like static. Invisible. That word again. He thought of Maya sketching on the couch with crayons, humming to herself. If she saw the edited video, she'd ask questions. Questions he didn't want to answer. Meanwhile, Juliet sat in her penthouse office, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows and a skyline that glittered like a crown. On the surface, she had every reason to celebrate. Investors were calling. Retreats were booking. The viral clip had doubled traffic to her website overnight. But she couldn't shake the memory of that rooftop moment, the way Mason had moved, the way he had caught Cole without malice, the calm authority of his words. No one learns anything when they're on the ground. It had unsettled her in a way she didn't dare admit. For all her accolades and branding, she realized she had forgotten what Tai Chi had meant to her at 19, when she had first learned it from an old master in Chinatown. Not performance, not empire, but a way of being human. Now here she was, front page perfect, while the truth had been buried. In the dim maintenance lounge, Mason sat on a folding chair eating a sandwich, while Maya sketched beside him. She held up a drawing stick figures on a rooftop. One had a mop, the other wore a gown. "Which one's me?" he asked with a wry smile. "You," she pointed at the figure with the mop. "You were like a superhero. You didn't hit anyone, but you still won." He chuckled softly. "Superheroes don't mop floors, kiddo. Maybe they should," she said simply. Her innocence pierced him deeper than any insult. That night, Grace Land sat in a coffee shop near the club, her laptop open, headphones in. She had pulled the raw rooftop footage from a friend who worked security. She compared it to the viral clip frame by frame. The difference was stark. The truth had been cut away. She drafted her article headline, "The Invisible Fighter," how a single-dad janitor exposed the soul of Tai Chi. But she hesitated. To publish meant to drag Mason into the spotlight he clearly avoided. She thought of his tired eyes, his quiet refusal, the weight he carried like a man who had long ago chosen peace over glory. Still, the journalist in her knew the world needed stories like his. Stories that reminded people strength wasn't just about dominance. It was about restraint. The next morning, Sloan strode into Juliet's office with the confidence of a man who thought he had saved the empire. "The numbers are through the roof," he announced. "Media loves it. Investors are lining up. Exactly what we wanted." Juliet's eyes narrowed. "What I wanted was honesty." Sloan waved her off. "Honesty doesn't trend. Control does. We control the narrative we win. Even if it means erasing the truth," she pressed. "Especially if it means erasing the truth," he replied with a smirk. For the first time in years, Juliet felt the empire she had built tilting beneath her feet. Was she a master of harmony, or just another brand polished by lies? That evening, Cole Barrett stood in front of a mirror in the locker room, fists clenched, sweat dripping. He replayed the rooftop scene over and over in his mind. The humiliation still burned. "I'll get him back," he muttered under his breath. "No janitor makes a fool of me." He didn't know Mason's history, but he didn't need to. Pride alone demanded retaliation. And Sloan was more than willing to give him the stage. By the end of the week, flyers appeared around Zenith Wellness The Proof Night, live demonstration with Cole Barrett. And beneath it, smaller letters, special guest Mason Reed. Mason only saw it when he walked into work. His heart sank. He hadn't agreed to anything. But in a world run by image and spectacle, consent was an afterthought. That night, as he tucked Maya into bed, she asked Daddy, "Why is your name on a poster at the club?" He swallowed hard, brushing her hair back gently. "Because some people think fighting is the only way to prove themselves." "Are you going to fight?" she whispered. His silence was answer enough. Rain tapped lightly against the windows of the cafe across the street from Zenith Wellness Club. Grace Land sat in the corner booth, her laptop glowing faintly in the dim morning light. The security footage played on her screen, unedited, raw, undeniable. She watched it again and again, Mason Reed, moving like a whisper of wind, redirecting Juliet May's push without effort, guiding Cole Barrett's rage into harmless emptiness. It wasn't brute force. It was something subtler, older, more disciplined. Grace pushed her glasses up and leaned back. She had covered martial arts for years, written about champions and trainers, but this was different. What she saw in Mason wasn't showmanship. It was mastery hidden in plain sight. She opened a fresh document and typed the headline she'd drafted the night before: The Invisible Fighter. How a single-dad janitor embodied the true spirit of Tai Chi. But her fingers hovered. Mason had told her there was no story. Publishing this would drag him into the light he seemed desperate to avoid. And yet, wasn't that the point? To give voice to the invisible, to remind the world that greatness often lived where no one bothered to look, inside Zenith Wellness. Juliet May was not enjoying her morning. She had barely slept, replaying the rooftop Spar in her mind. For 2 decades, she had trained refined, turned Tai Chi into a billion-dollar brand. But the janitor Mason had reminded her of something she had lost. Tai Chi not as spectacle, not as performance, but as balance between people. Sloan Whitaker stormed into her office immaculate in his charcoal suit. He carried a tablet showing live social media metrics. "The proof night announcement is trending," he said. "Cole versus the janitor. It's the perfect story arc. People love an underdog. Investors are buzzing." Juliet frowned. He never agreed to fight. Sloan shrugged. "Consent is a formality. We make the offer, he shows up, it's done. If he refuses, even better, Cole wins by default, and the brand looks untouchable." Juliet's lips tightened. "You're exploiting him." Sloan smirked. "I'm protecting you. Don't forget, Juliet, perception is reality. And right now the perception is that a janitor made you stumble. We have to bury that with a bigger story." She turned away, gazing at the skyline. For the first time in years, she wondered if she had traded the heart of Tai Chi for the hollow sound of applause. Down in the basement lounge, Mason sat on a folding chair, his lunchbox open. Maya swung her legs beside him, munching on an apple. Her crayons scattered across the table, coloring pages, filled with stick figures sparring under stars. Grace appeared in the doorway, damp from the rain. "Mind if I sit?" she asked. Mason didn't look up. "Depends. Are you here as a journalist or just a person who wants a dry seat?" "A little of both," she admitted, sliding into the chair. She nodded at Maya, who eyed her warily, then returned to coloring. "I saw the poster," Grace said quietly. "The proof night. They're setting you up." Mason sighed. "Not my problem. I didn't agree to it. They'll twist it until you have no choice," she warned. "Either you fight or you're painted as a coward. They'll control the narrative just like they did with the rooftop video." His jaw clenched. He wanted to tell her it didn't matter, that he'd learned long ago to let the world think what it wanted. But then he glanced at Maya. She deserved more than a father who stayed silent while others lied. Grace leaned forward. "I've been digging. You're not just some janitor. Army records say you served 12 years in Special Forces. After that, you taught non-lethal combatives to peacekeeping units. Then nothing. You disappeared." Mason's eyes flicked to her sharp as a blade. "Stop digging. You could change the whole story," she pressed. "Show people what real strength looks like. Restraint, balance, integrity. They need to see it. She needs to see it." Her eyes flicked toward Maya. For a long moment, Mason said nothing. Then he spoke, his voice low. "My daughter needs a father, not a headline. And I'm not here to teach the world. I'm here to raise her." Grace studied him, then nodded slowly. She understood, even if it frustrated her. That evening, Juliet lingered in the training hall after the last class ended. She moved through a Tai Chi form alone, each gesture precise yet hollow. Her reflection in the mirrors showed a woman in perfect balance, but inside she felt off-center. She remembered the look in Mason's eyes on the rooftop, calm, steady, unshaken. He had carried himself not like a janitor, not even like a fighter, but like someone who knew who he was in a way she had forgotten. The door opened. Cole Barrett swaggered in, wrapping his hands with cloth tape. "You should have seen the comments," he said. "People can't wait to watch me put that janitor in his place." Juliet stopped mid-form. "He's not your enemy, Cole." Cole grinned. "Maybe not. But he's my ticket back to the spotlight." She watched him strike the heavy bag, each punch loud and aggressive. The sound echoed like a warning. Back home, Mason tucked Maya into bed. She looked up at him, eyes wide. "Daddy, why do they want you to fight again?" she whispered. He brushed her hair back gently. "Because some people think fighting proves who they are. And you," he paused. "I think proving who you are comes from how you protect others, not how hard you hit them." She smiled sleepily, her trust in him absolute. But Mason knew the storm was coming. He could ignore Sloane, he could refuse Cole, but he could not shield Maya from every headline. And so for the first time in years, Mason felt the old weight stir the part of him that once led soldiers, that once carried a nation's flag, that once knew the price of silence. The world wanted a fight, but what it needed was something else. The flyers plastered across Zenith Wellness were impossible to ignore. Bold fonts, flashy graphics, Cole Barrett's chiseled face, front and center. The proof night, witness mastery live, and beneath it, smaller text that carried more weight than ink, should special guest Mason read. Mason stopped in the lobby the first time he saw it. His mop bucket rattled to a halt, water sloshing against the rim. He stared at his name printed in sleek black letters, framed like an invitation or a trap. He hadn't agreed. No one had asked him. But here it was, his invisibility shattered by marketing. From behind the counter, two receptionists giggled over the flyer. "He's gonna get crushed," one whispered. "Cole's a beast," the other added. "That janitor won't last a second." Mason pushed the mop bucket forward without a word, but inside something stirred. Not anger, he had learned to master that long ago. It was something quieter, heavier. A reminder that silence didn't always protect you. Sometimes it only sharpened the knife pointed at your back. Cole Barrett basked in the glow of attention. He strutted through the training hall, showing off for students who whispered about the upcoming event. He fed on their curiosity, their awe. "You'll all see what happens when a pretender steps onto the mat," Cole boasted during class. "No belt, no training, no respect. It's one thing to mop a floor, it's another to stand in a ring." His words stung more than he realized. A few students had witnessed the rooftop spar, and they knew the truth, that Mason hadn't been humiliated, that he had carried himself with poise none of them had seen in Cole. But no one spoke up. Fear of Cole's temper held their tongues. Juliet May sat in her office with Sloane Whitaker pacing before her desk. "This is genius," Sloane said, waving a flyer. "Cole gets his spotlight, the investors get a spectacle, and you, Juliet, you get redemption. No one will remember you stumbling against that janitor. All they'll remember is how your team reaffirmed your mastery." Juliet frowned. "Redemption isn't about crushing someone beneath you." Sloane chuckled. "Tell that to Wall Street, or the tabloids, or half the donors writing you checks. They want a clean story. Billionaire master, unbeatable team harmony restored. Give the crowd what they want, Juliet." But Harmony Juliet thought bitterly wasn't about burying the truth. It was about facing it. And Mason had shown her that more clearly than any investor report. Grace Lan had been busy. With her notebook filled and her camera loaded, she tracked the whispers through Zenith's corridors. She overheard trainers questioning the edit of the rooftop video. She found staff muttering about Sloane's manipulation, and every piece added to the puzzle she was building. One evening, she cornered Cole in the locker room. Why target Mason? "He never asked for this." Cole grinned, towel draped around his neck. "Because the guy made me look weak. And I don't tolerate weakness. You'll see proof night will shut everyone up." "You're wrong," Grace said firmly. "Proof night will expose more than you think." Cole laughed her off, but a flicker of unease crossed his eyes. In the maintenance lounge, Mason sat with Maya, perched on a stool beside him. She was coloring again this time, drawing a stick figure with a cape holding back a wave. "Daddy," she asked, "why does Mr. Cole want to fight you?" Mason's hand stilled on the mop handle, because sometimes people are afraid of being forgotten. They think fighting will make them remembered. "Will you fight him?" she whispered. Mason sighed, brushing her cheek. "If I can help it, no. But sometimes standing still makes more noise than swinging." Maya tilted her head, trying to untangle his words. To her, he wasn't a mystery. He was simply her dad, the man who cooked eggs in the morning, who patched her backpack when the zipper broke, who read bedtime stories until she fell asleep. But to the world, he was becoming something else. Days passed, and proof night loomed closer. Mason felt the shift in the air, the curious glances, the hushed whispers, the subtle smirks. He was no longer invisible, and yet he wished he could vanish. One evening as he left the club with Maya, Juliet intercepted him in the lobby. She wore her usual poise, but her eyes carried a weight he hadn't seen before. "Mason," she said quietly, "I owe you an apology." He raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For letting this circus happen. For letting Sloane turn what should have been a moment of learning into a marketing stunt." She paused, lowering her voice. "You don't have to do this." Mason studied her. She was sincere, he could see that. But sincerity alone couldn't erase the posters, the hype, the millions of eyes waiting to see him fall. "I never agreed to any of this," he said flatly. "I know," Juliet whispered. "But if you step away now, they'll say you were afraid. And if you step in, they'll say you're a fraud, unless you win. Either way, you lose. Not if I remember who I'm doing this for." Mason replied, glancing down at Maya. For a moment their eyes locked. Juliet felt a tremor of something she hadn't expected: respect, perhaps even admiration. Mason wasn't a pawn in anyone's story. He was a man writing his own. Meanwhile, Sloane tightened his grip. He leaked teasers to the press, sold tickets disguised as donations, and painted Proof Night as the ultimate clash discipline versus delusion champion versus nobody. But Grace had her own plan. She reached out to contacts in the media, preparing to drop the uncut rooftop footage the moment Proof Night began. If Sloane wanted a spectacle, she would make sure the truth burned brighter than his lies. The night before the event, Mason sat by Maya's bed as she drifted to sleep. He whispered a promise he had never spoken aloud. "No matter what happens tomorrow," he said softly, "I won't let them take who we are." Outside, the city pulsed with anticipation. Proof Night was coming. And with it, the battle Mason had tried to avoid all his life, not just a fight of bodies, but a war of truth against spectacle. The rain had cleared by morning, leaving the city streets slick and shining under pale light. Mason Reed walked Maya to school, her small hand warm in his as she skipped over puddles. She hummed the tune of a cartoon theme song, blissfully unaware of the storm gathering around her father's name. He kissed her forehead at the school gates, watching until she disappeared inside. Only then did his shoulders sag, the mask of calm slipping. Proof Night was coming, and he couldn't stop it. Not Sloane's ambition, not Cole's pride, not the tidal wave of public hunger for spectacle. Across town, Grace Lan was in the archives of a Veteran Affairs building, her notebook already filled with scribbled dates and cross-references. She had pulled Mason's name from military rosters, traced it through deployment logs. The picture forming was more complicated than she expected. Staff Sergeant Mason Reed, 12 years Special Forces. There were commendations medals for leadership, a note about his proficiency in non-lethal combatives. But there was also a sudden break discharge papers marked voluntary separation after classified incident overseas. The details were redacted. Grace sat back in her chair, heart pounding. He wasn't just a janitor. He wasn't even just a veteran. He was someone who had been entrusted with the hardest assignments and had walked away carrying secrets heavy enough to silence him for years. She whispered to herself, "What happened to you, Mason?" That evening at Zenith, Mason scrubbed scuff marks from the marble floor while the gym above echoed with shouts and thuds of Cole Barrett's training. The crowd was already swelling for Proof Night students, influencers, investors, thrill seekers. They didn't care about truth. They wanted a show. Grace appeared again, notebook tucked under her arm. She crouched near Mason, her voice low. "I know who you are now," she said. Mason didn't look up. "Then you know enough to leave it alone. You were Special Forces." Grace pressed. "You trained soldiers in how to fight without killing. That's exactly what you did on the rooftop. Redirect, neutralize, preserve dignity. Why hide that?" Mason wrung the mop water dripping into the bucket. His jaw tightened. "Because the last time I didn't hide," he said quietly. "Someone I cared about didn't come home." Grace stilled. He hadn't given details, but the raw weight in his voice told her everything. "You think being silent protects Maya," she said softly. "But it only makes it easier for Sloan to twist your story. If you don't speak, he'll speak for you." Mason finally looked at her eyes sharp. "My job isn't to win public battles. My job is to raise my daughter. That's all that matters." Grace nodded slowly, but inside she resolved if Mason wouldn't defend himself, she would. Juliet May, meanwhile, was wrestling with her own ghosts. Late at night, she walked through the training hall alone, the mirrors reflecting her every graceful movement. She had built her empire on Tai Chi's philosophy of balance, but she could feel how far she'd drifted. She remembered being 19, studying with Master Chen in Chinatown, hearing him say, "Tai Chi is not about power over others. It's about harmony with them." On the rooftop, Mason had shown her that truth with a single touch. Now her COO was turning that moment into a circus. Juliet poured herself a glass of water and whispered to her reflection, "What have I become?" The night before, Proof Night. Cole Barrett tightened the straps on his gloves, pacing the training mat. He imagined the roar of the crowd, the flash of cameras, the headlines declaring him victor. He saw Mason's calm eyes in his mind and felt the sting of humiliation. This time he muttered, "I'll break that calm." But what Cole didn't understand, and what the crowd wouldn't expect, was that Mason didn't fight to win. He fought to end the fight before it began, and that was far more dangerous than any strike. At home, Mason sat by Maya's bedside. The apartment was quiet, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. Maya's drawings covered the wall, superheroes, princesses, and now a new one, a stick figure in overalls standing between two others, arms outstretched, keeping them apart. "Daddy," she murmured sleepily. "Are you scared?" Mason brushed her hair back. "Everyone gets scared. The trick is not letting fear decide who you are." "Then who are you?" she asked, eyes heavy with sleep. He paused, staring at the ceiling. Who was he now? A janitor? A father? A soldier trying to forget? Or the man the world was about to see again, whether he wanted it or not? As Maya drifted off, Mason whispered a promise to himself. "Tomorrow, I won't fight for pride. I'll fight for her." Grace, back in her apartment, opened her laptop. She had the uncut rooftop footage ready to publish. But more than that, she had Mason's story, the parts she'd pieced together, the whispers of his past. She hesitated, fingers hovering over the keyboard. To release it now might crush him. But to wait could mean letting Sloan win. The cursor blinked a silent demand. Grace inhaled, steadying herself. tomorrow the world would see the truth. And Mason Reed, whether he wanted it or not, would no longer be invisible. The rooftop of Zenith Wellness looked nothing like it had the night of Juliet May's foundation launch. Gone was the quiet elegance of bamboo and wind chimes. Tonight, it had been transformed into a spectacle rows of sleek chairs, a ring of bright LED lights and cameras stationed at every angle. Proof night had arrived. The city below glittered, but all eyes were fixed on the stage above. Guests filed in, clutching programs branded with slogans, "Balance through power." The promise of a fight hummed in the air like static, feeding a crowd hungry for entertainment. Cole Barrett stood near the mat. Muscles flexed, a confident grin plastered across his face. He relished the cheers and the flashing phones. This was his redemption, his chance to erase the memory of stumbling against a janitor in front of his own students. And Mason Reed. He stood at the edge of the rooftop, a mop handle still in hand, his maintenance uniform unchanged. He hadn't agreed to this, but Sloan Whitaker had left no room for refusal. The flyers had carried his name, the media had baited the crowd, and now, under the glare of lights, he was caught in a trap of spectacle. Maya clutched her backpack in the front row, eyes wide. Juliet sat beside her, her hands clasped tightly her face, a mask of composure that barely hid her unease. She leaned down to Maya. "Your father won't let anything happen to himself," Juliet whispered. "Trust him." But inside, Juliet was far from calm. This wasn't Tai Chi. This wasn't harmony. It was theater designed by Sloan to sell headlines. She glanced toward him, impeccably dressed, smiling for cameras already scripting the story in his head. Grace Land, seated near the media pit, adjusted her camera. She had the uncut rooftop footage queued on her phone, ready to upload at the perfect moment. Tonight wasn't just about a fight. Tonight was about exposing the lie Sloan had built. She glanced at Mason. His posture was unassuming, his face unreadable. But she could see the storm beneath the calm, the weight of a man who had sworn off violence, now being forced to defend not just himself, but his daughter's dignity. The announcer's voice boomed through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Proof Night. Tonight you will witness a demonstration of skill, power, and mastery. In this corner, Zenith's own champion Cole Barrett." The crowd erupted in cheers as Cole flexed, shadowboxing theatrically. He shot Mason a glare filled with contempt. And in this corner, our special guest, the man who dared to step on the rooftop last week. Mason Reed. The applause was scattered hesitant. Some laughed, others booed, but a few clapped with genuine curiosity. Mason simply inclined his head, setting the mop handle aside. The bell rang. Cole wasted no time. He lunged forward with a barrage of sharp jabs, his body a blur of motion. The crowd roared approval, but Mason didn't meet him with fists. He shifted, sidestepped, letting the strikes cut through empty air. Each movement was subtle, precise. His feet grounded, his breath steady, his eyes calm. Cole grew louder, grunting with each blow. Mason's silence was unnerving, his lack of resistance, a mirror that magnified Cole's desperation. "Fight me," Cole snarled. "Stop dancing and fight like a man." Mason redirected a strike with a gentle turn of the wrist, guiding Cole past him. Cole stumbled, but didn't fall, because Mason caught his elbow, steadying him before releasing. The crowd gasped. Juliet leaned forward, her heart racing. She recognized the form, the philosophy. Mason wasn't fighting. He was practicing Tai Chi at its purest, absorbing, redirecting, preserving. Sloan frowned. This wasn't the spectacle he wanted. He wanted dominance, humiliation, blood. He signaled to the cameramen to keep the focus on Cole, to frame Mason as passive, cowardly. "Make him look weak," Sloan hissed. But Grace was already uploading. The uncut rooftop video hit the web raw and unpolished, showing Mason's mastery, his refusal to humiliate. Within minutes, Phones buzzed across the rooftop as notifications poured in. The truth was spreading. Back in the ring, Cole's frustration boiled over. He unleashed a spinning kick faster, harder, fueled by pride and fury. Mason pivoted, guiding the force away with a sweep of his arm. Cole nearly toppled into the mat, but again Mason steadied him, his voice barely audible. No one learns anything on the ground. The phrase echoed across the rooftop, repeated in whispers, caught on microphones, carried into live stream captions. Maya's eyes shone with pride. Juliet felt her throat tighten. Grace smiled through her camera lens, and for the first time, even some in the crowd began to question what they were watching. This wasn't weakness. This was strength redefined. The bell rang again, signaling the end of the round. Cole staggered back, sweat pouring, chest heaving. Mason stood untouched, his breathing calm. The announcer hesitated, unsure how to frame what had just happened. The crowd murmured, divided, some mocking Mason's refusal to strike others, awed by his composure. Juliet rose to her feet, her voice cutting through the noise. "This is what Tai Chi truly means," she said firmly. "Not dominance, not spectacle, but harmony." Sloane's face blanched. This wasn't his script. The narrative was slipping away. As the lights glared and the cameras rolled, Mason Reed became something he had never sought to be a symbol. Not of power or conquest, but of a deeper truth. Proof night had begun, but the proof was not what anyone expected. And it was only the beginning. The night air pulsed with anticipation. The crowd leaned forward in their seats, buzzing with divided emotions. Some hungry for a knockout, others unsettled by the quiet strength they had just witnessed. Cole Barrett paced like a caged animal, fists clenched, jaw tight. His pride burned hotter than the rooftop lights. He could hear the whispers. He can't touch the janitor. He's losing control. Each murmur fueled his fury. Across the mat, Mason Reed stood still, feet rooted, as if planted into the earth itself. His breathing was steady, his eyes calm. He didn't look like a man preparing to fight. He looked like a man at peace in the eye of a storm. The bell rang for the second round. Cole exploded forward, unleashing a storm of strikes. Jabs snapped through the air. Hooks thundered toward Mason's ribs, a knee lashed out with brutal intent. Every strike was fast, precise, powerful, the kind of aggression that had won him countless gym bouts. But Mason did not meet force with force. He flowed. Each punch dissolved into empty space, redirected by a subtle turn of his shoulder, a gentle sweep of his hand. Cole's knee was met not with a block, but with a shift of weight that left him off balance, stumbling into nothing. The rooftop gasped. Even those who had cheered for blood could see the difference now. Cole was fighting to dominate. Mason was moving to preserve, stand, and fight. Cole roared, sweat dripping from his forehead. Mason's voice was low, calm, unshaken. "I am fighting, just not the way you want." Juliet May's heart pounded as she watched from the front row. She saw in Mason's movements the very essence of Tai Chi she had once known, but forgotten the art of yielding, the strength in gentleness, the wisdom of turning fury into stillness. She turned her gaze toward the crowd. Investors who had come expecting blood sport now whispered nervously. Students shifted in their seats, recognizing techniques they had never seen applied with such depth. And Maya, her small hands clutching her backpack, watched her father with wide, glowing eyes. Sloan Whitaker, however, seethed near the production booth. He barked at the cameramen. Cut it differently. Make Cole look dominant. But his commands fell flat as Grace Land's footage continued spreading online. The hashtags had already taken over. Invisible. Strength, find your harmony, fury. The real proof Sloan's script was unraveling, and he knew it. Cole, desperate, tried a different tactic. He feinted left, then launched a spinning back fist aiming for Mason's temple. Gasps tore from the crowd. but Mason bent like a reed in the wind, the strike brushing past him harmlessly. In the same motion, he guided Cole's momentum forward, placing a steadying hand on his back to keep him from crashing to the floor. "You're holding me up," Cole spat, humiliated. "No," Mason replied evenly. "I'm reminding you what balance feels like." The words struck deeper than any blow. Juliet rose to her feet, unable to stay silent. This is the lesson she called out. Harmony against fury. Balance against chaos. This is Tai Chi. The crowd fell into a stunned hush. Even the announcer hesitated, unsure if he should reclaim the narrative or let Juliet's voice carry. Grace captured every moment, her camera zooming in on Mason's calm expression, Cole's sweat-soaked fury, Juliet's resolute stance. She knew the story was shifting in real time, becoming bigger than proof night. Cole, blinded by rage, roared and lunged again, throwing a wild combination jab, cross-hook kick. Mason's movements grew even softer, almost invisible. He sidestepped, absorbed, redirected. It was less a fight and more a dance, one man burning himself out the other, preserving him from collapse. And when Cole's final kick missed and his body pitched forward, Mason caught him again, his arms like steady branches preventing a fall. Why, Cole gasped, chest heaving. "Because no one learns lying on the ground," Mason said, quietly, his voice carrying across the rooftop like a bell. For a moment, silence. Then a ripple moved through the crowd. Not jeers, not laughter, but applause. Scattered at first then, building a recognition of something greater than spectacle. Juliet felt her chest tighten with pride and guilt all at once. This was what she had built her empire on, and yet it took Mason, a janitor, a veteran, a single father, to remind her of its soul. Sloan clenched his fists, teeth grinding. This wasn't supposed to happen. The investors weren't supposed to clap for humility. They were supposed to cheer for dominance. If Mason continued the entire narrative, his narrative would collapse. He leaned close to a cameraman. "Shut the feed down," he hissed. But it was too late. Grace had gone live on her own channel, broadcasting Mason's every movement to an audience that was growing by the second. The bell rang again, ending the round. Cole collapsed into his corner, sweat pouring his chest, rising and falling like a drum. Mason stood untouched, hands relaxed at his sides, breathing steady as ever. The crowd erupted, not with the bloodlust Sloan had promised, but with respect, awe, even gratitude. They weren't witnessing a fight. They were witnessing a truth. And as Mason glanced at his daughter, who sat beaming through tears of pride, he knew this wasn't about surviving proof night anymore. It was about proving that harmony could withstand fury, and that true strength needed no fists to be seen. Applause still rippled across the rooftop, but it wasn't the thunderous cheer of a crowd baying for blood. It was hesitant, scattered, rising into something reverent. The guests were not celebrating domination. They were acknowledging something deeper, the way a janitor had stood unshaken against fury, offering dignity instead of defeat. To most, it was unforgettable. To Sloan Whitaker, it was unacceptable. In the corner of the rooftop, Sloan's face was tight with rage. His carefully engineered narrative, the Billionaire's team reclaiming mastery, the humiliating fall of a janitor, was slipping away. Investors were clapping not for Cole, but for Mason. Cameras were catching Juliet May's words, not his scripted commentary. And then, like any man cornered, Sloan reached for his sharpest weapon, distortion. Minutes after the second round ended, notifications pinged across phones. On giant monitors around the rooftop, a new clip began to play. It was Mason, but not the Mason, standing calm and collected on the rooftop. This was Mason caught mid-step, his hand extended toward Cole. The footage was zoomed, slowed, stripped of context. To the untrained eye, It looked like an aggressive shove rather than a steadying touch. The caption beneath blared, "Janitor attacks proof. Night exposes the truth." Gasps rippled through the audience. Some frowned in confusion. Others muttered disapproval. The fragile applause faltered. Juliet leapt to her feet. "That's not real," she shouted. "That's edited footage." But Sloan was already on his feet, playing the role of righteous narrator. This is why we needed Proof Night. To unmask imposters. To protect the honor of our discipline. You've seen it for yourself. He isn't calm. He's cunning. He's manipulating the crowd. Mason stood in the center of the mat, his face unreadable. He heard the whispers turning. He saw the crowd's trust wobble, the doubt seeping in. He could feel Maya's frightened eyes on him from the front row. Cole, chest still heaving, saw the footage too. His pride flared. Maybe this was his redemption after all. "See?" he shouted, pointing at Mason. "He's no sage. He's a fraud." The crowd began to divide, half booing, half murmuring in defense. Confusion pulsed like a fever. Grace Land's blood boiled. She knew exactly what Sloan had done. Pulling her phone from her bag, she stood and shouted, "That video is a lie." Her voice was drowned in the din. She uploaded the full footage again, blasting it across every platform she had access to, adding a caption of her own: "Truth versus spin." Watch carefully. Decide for yourself. The live stream caught her defiance, and online audiences surged. Comments poured in. "That's not what happened. Watch the angle. He caught him, not shoved him." Others, fueled by Sloan's smear, doubled down. "No, look, he's attacking. He's dangerous." The rooftop itself had become a mirror of the internet, divided, chaotic, swaying between truth and illusion. Juliet stepped into the ring, fury flashing in her eyes. She turned to Sloan, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You've crossed the line." Sloan smirked. "I saved your reputation." No, Juliet shot back. "You buried the truth to protect yourself, and now you're dragging my name into it." The crowd hushed, sensing the fracture. Cameras swiveled, hungry for every second. Cole, emboldened by the chaos, raised his fists again. "Let's finish this. Right here, right now. No excuses." The announcer hesitated, caught between Sloan's glare and Juliet's protest. Finally, he raised the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, the third round." But Mason lifted his hand. His calm silenced even the announcer. "I will continue," he said, his voice steady, carrying to every corner of the rooftop. "But not to fight for pride or for spectacle. I continue because my daughter is watching, and because truth deserves more than lies." Maya's small hand clutched her backpack tighter. Tears welled in her eyes, but pride glowed through them. Sloan's jaw clenched. He had expected Mason to storm out or crumble under the smear. Instead, Mason had turned the trap into a declaration. Juliet moved to Mason's side, surprising even herself. "You're not alone in this," she said firmly, loud enough for all to hear. "If this night means anything, let it be proof that harmony cannot be twisted into spectacle." The crowd murmured, shaken. Some clapped, others hesitated, still unsure what to believe. Grace pressed, "Go live once more." Her stream cut through the noise, showing side-by-side comparisons, Sloan's doctored clip versus the raw footage. Her voice narrated clearly. He didn't shove. He steadied. He preserved balance. Watch closely, see the difference between fury and harmony. Online, the tide shifted fast. Hashtags flooded in. "Balance, not lies." "Stand with Mason." Viewers began to call out Sloan directly. Screenshots of his manipulations spread like wildfire. Cole, oblivious to the unraveling, lunged again as the third round bell rang. Mason's eyes softened, his body shifting, absorbing. He didn't fight the man before him. He fought the narrative that had turned truth into spectacle. Every deflection, every redirection was a living rebuttal harmony against fury, dignity against distortion. The rooftop once divided began to lean. Gasps turned into claps. Confusion shifted into awe. The crowd was beginning to see not just the fight, but the lie unraveling beneath it. Sloan gripped the edge of the production booth, sweat beading on his forehead. His perfect PR machine was collapsing undone by the very thing he underestimated: integrity. And Mason, silent in the center of the mat, was proving that sometimes the greatest victory wasn't striking harder, but refusing to be broken by deceit. The rooftop lights glared like a stage. Cole Barrett circled Mason Reed with fists raised, but it wasn't just the two men in the ring anymore. The air vibrated with tension from every corner, audience members whispering. Juliet May standing at Mason's side, Sloan Whitaker barking orders into headsets. And beyond the rooftop, the story was already spilling into the world. Grace Land's live stream streamed onto thousands of screens, and the uncut footage spread faster than Sloan's doctored clip. Truth had begun to fight back. Grace's pulse hammered as she checked her feed. Comments scrolled by in a blur. The janitor isn't fighting, he's teaching. Watch the slowed frame he catches Cole. He doesn't shove him. Who is this guy? Why isn't anyone talking about his background? That was the question she knew she had to answer. Grace stepped away from the media pit and found a quieter corner, her phone pressed to her ear. On the other end, a contact in the Veteran Affairs office whispered, "I shouldn't be sharing this, but you're right. Mason Reed isn't just some janitor. He was Special Forces, deployed overseas, non-lethal combatives instructor. His record is complicated. Complicated how Grace asked, scribbling in her notebook. Classified, the voice said. But I'll tell you this, he walked away from a decorated career after an incident that never made headlines. Some men leave because they've given enough. He left because he couldn't live with what happened." Grace closed her eyes. She didn't have the details, but she had enough. Mason wasn't hiding from weakness. He was hiding from a past heavy enough to bury anyone else. Back in the ring, Cole's fury escalated. He swung with everything he had left. Wild hooks, a desperate knee. Mason redirected, flowed, guided him back to balance. Cole's chest heaved, his strength unraveling with each failed strike. "You're mocking me," Cole spat. "No," Mason said quietly. "I'm showing you another way." The words cut through the rooftop like a current. Even some of Cole's supporters shifted in their seats, torn between loyalty and the undeniable truth unfolding before their eyes. Sloan, watching his empire of spin collapse, made a desperate move. He seized a microphone and stormed to the edge of the mat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he cried, "don't be fooled by theatrics. This man is no humble father. He's a manipulator trained to deceive. He hides behind calm words while undermining our discipline." The crowd murmured, uncertainty flaring again. Sloan pressed harder, sensing cracks. "Ask yourselves, why does a janitor move like that? Who is he really? What is he hiding?" Grace didn't hesitate. She marched forward, camera still streaming, and raised her voice. "I'll tell you who he is. Mason Reed. Single father. Army veteran. Special Forces. A man who taught soldiers to fight without killing. A man who carries scars you can't see. He's not hiding weakness, he's hiding pain. And even now, forced into a fight he never wanted, he refuses to humiliate his opponent." Her words cut through the rooftop raw and unfiltered. The crowd erupted, not in jeers, but in gasps, murmurs, applause. Phones lifted higher. The online audience swelled into the tens of thousands. Maya, eyes wide, turned to Juliet. "Is it true my dad was a soldier?" Juliet knelt beside her. "Yes, and tonight he's showing the world what real strength looks like." Cole froze mid-step. Special Forces. His opponent wasn't just a janitor. He was a man who had lived through battles Cole couldn't imagine. Suddenly, the fight felt less like redemption and more like exposure. Still, pride wouldn't let him stop. He charged again, shouting, "Then fight me like a soldier." Mason's voice rose for the first time, firm but steady. "I'm not here to be a soldier. I'm here to be a father." With that, he redirected Cole's lunge, guided him past, and set him upright once more. No humiliation, only balance. The rooftop fell silent. Juliet stepped forward, her voice carrying into the hush. "This is the truth you tried to bury, Sloane. That strength isn't measured in domination, but in restraint. Mason doesn't need your stage, your cameras, your lies. He already proved himself the moment he chose balance over fury." Sloane's face flushed red. He shouted back, "You're throwing away everything we built. Investors will pull out. This brand will crumble." Juliet's eyes blazed, then let it crumble. "I'd rather lose money than lose my soul." The crowd erupted in applause, this time unified, thunderous. Even those who had doubted now cheered, swept into the tide of truth. Grace's live stream soared past 100,000 viewers. Comments filled the screen. "This man is a hero. Balance over violence. This is what the world needs. Protect him, not smear him." And as Mason stood tall in the center of the rooftop, his daughter smiling through tears, the narrative finally shifted. The world no longer saw a janitor forced into a circus. They saw a man who refused to break a father, who fought without fists, a veteran who had chosen harmony over fury. The truth had finally found its voice. The rooftop had transformed into something no one expected. It was no longer a stage for spectacle, no longer a battleground for pride. It had become a classroom, and every person present, whether seated in a velvet chair or watching through a live stream, was a student. At the center of it all stood Mason Reed, steady as stone, his voice calm as water. Cole Barrett, drenched in sweat, circled him like a restless storm, fists trembling with fatigue. The crowd held its breath. Even the city beyond seemed quieter, as though New York itself leaned in to listen. "Fight me," Cole snarled, desperation cracking his voice. "Show them you're not afraid." Mason didn't move. He stood tall, his eyes locked on Cole with neither anger nor pity. "I'm not afraid," he said softly. "But fear isn't what drives me, and fighting isn't what defines me." His words rolled across the rooftop, cutting through the noise, piercing deeper than any punch. Cole roared and lunged, his last reserves of strength pouring into a furious combination: jab, hook, kick. The crowd gasped, expecting impact, bracing for violence. But Mason shifted, breathed, and moved as though time bent around him. He stepped aside, lowered his stance, and with a single guiding motion turned Cole's fury into emptiness. Cole stumbled forward, unbalanced arms flailing. And then, something extraordinary happened. Mason caught him. He didn't slam him down. He didn't let him fall. He placed one hand gently on Cole's back, the other steady on his arm, guiding him upright. The rooftop fell silent as Mason leaned close and whispered words that echoed through the microphones, amplified into every ear. "No one learns anything lying on the ground." Cole froze. The fury in his eyes dimmed, replaced by something rawer: confusion, shame, perhaps even recognition. His chest heaved, his muscles trembled, but for the first time that night, he didn't strike again. He just stood there, staring at the man who had every chance to humiliate him and chose instead to uphold him. The crowd erupted into applause, not the hesitant clapping of before, but a thunderous, unified wave of respect. Phones lifted higher, capturing the moment that would live far beyond proof night. Juliet May's eyes filled with tears she hadn't expected. In Mason's restraint, she saw the mirror of everything she had once loved about Tai Chi: the balance, the compassion, the refusal to destroy when preservation was possible. She realized with painful clarity how far she had drifted into empire building, forgetting that at its core, Tai Chi was never about empire. It was about harmony. Grace Land filmed every second, her live stream numbers skyrocketing. Comments poured across the screen. That's strength. He saved him. He saved the man who tried to humiliate him. We need teachers like this. Her throat tightened. She had followed fighters, champions, and masters for years, but none had struck her heart the way this single-dad veteran just had. Mason wasn't teaching punches or postures. He was teaching dignity. Sloan Whitaker, however, was unraveling. He stormed toward the mat, microphone in hand, his voice cracking with fury. Don't be fooled. This is weakness, disguised as wisdom. Our brand is about strength, dominance, control. If you clap for this man, you spit on everything we've built. But the crowd wasn't listening anymore. The applause grew louder, drowning him out. Juliet stepped forward, intercepting Sloan with fire in her eyes. No, Sloan, she said firmly. If we clap for this man, we reclaim everything we've lost. The investors, once cautious, now joined in the applause. Their expressions weren't the cold calculations of financiers anymore. They looked like people touched by something they hadn't expected. Something human. Cole sank to his knees on the mat, his pride collapsing under the weight of Mason's mercy. He looked up, voice hoarse. Why didn't you finish me when you had the chance? Mason crouched, his gaze steady. Because finishing you teaches nothing. Lifting you teaches everything. The rooftop went silent again, as though every ear needed to hear those words. Maya, tears streaking her cheeks, stood from her chair and ran toward her father. Juliet caught her breath, afraid security might stop her, but no one moved. The crowd parted as the little girl reached the mat and threw her arms around Mason's waist. You didn't fall, she whispered, voice trembling. And you didn't let him fall, either. Mason bent, kissing the top of her head, his voice soft. That's the lesson, sweetheart. If we only stand for ourselves, we're half the people we could be. But when we help others stand, that's when we're whole. The rooftop audience rose to their feet. The ovation shook the night air, echoing across Manhattan's skyline. Grace's camera caught Juliet wiping her eyes, investors clapping with genuine emotion, students bowing their heads in respect. Even Cole, still on his knees, lowered his fists at last. He pressed his forehead to the mat, a silent gesture of surrender, not to Mason's strength, but to his humanity. Sloan raged, shouting into his dead microphone, his voice lost in the tide of truth. For the first time in his career, spin had failed him. Lies had collapsed against the weight of something too real to twist. And Mason, standing in the center of it all, with his daughter's small hand in his, gave the world its proof. Not that harmony could defeat fury, but that harmony was the only victory worth claiming. The rooftop stood in stunned silence after Mason's final words. The applause had ebbed into something heavier, more profound, a stillness filled not with noise, but with understanding. For once, the cameras were not chasing spectacle. They were capturing truth. Juliet May stepped forward, her heels clicking softly against the mat. She looked out at the crowd, her empire reflected in their faces. Investors, clients, students, strangers. For years, she had built her brand on perfection, on flawless demonstrations, on carefully curated narratives. Tonight, she realized those narratives had cost her the very soul of what Tai Chi meant. I owe you all the truth, she said, her voice steady but edged with emotion. What you witnessed here was not weakness. It was strength at its truest. And I owe Mason Reed and every one of you an apology for allowing this night to become a circus instead of a lesson. Her words cut through the air. Some in the crowd nodded, others whispered, but all listened. Juliet turned sharply toward Sloan Whitaker, who stood fuming at the edge of the rooftop. And you, she said firmly, You've twisted stories, doctored footage, and exploited people for profit. As of this moment, you are no longer part of Zenith Wellness. Gasps rippled across the audience. Sloane's face twisted with disbelief. You can't fire me in front of everyone. Yes, I can, Juliet interrupted, her voice clear as crystal. Because if I don't, then everything I claim to stand for is a lie. Security stepped forward, hesitant at first, then firm when Juliet nodded. Sloane's protests faded as he was escorted off the rooftop, his empire of spin crumbling behind him. Cole Barrett remained on his knees, head bowed. Slowly he rose to his feet, his body trembling not from exhaustion but from shame. He turned to Mason, eyes avoiding his gaze at first, then lifting with effort. I spent years teaching students to strike harder, to dominate, to win at any cost, Cole said, voice raw. And tonight you showed me I haven't been teaching them strength at all. I've been teaching them fear. Mason shook his head gently. Fear doesn't have to define you. What matters is what you do from this moment forward. Cole swallowed hard, then bowed deeply sincerely. The crowd erupted again this time, not for a victor, but for a man humbled enough to change. Juliet approached Mason and Maya. For the first time she bowed as well, the billionaire lowering herself before a janitor in faded overalls. Thank you, she said softly, for reminding me that harmony isn't a brand, it's a way of life. Maya looked up at Juliet, her small hand still clutching her father's. Does that mean Daddy won? Juliet smiled through tears. He didn't just win Maya. He taught us all how to stand. The rooftop dissolved into applause and embraces, but beneath the celebration something larger stirred. Mason had not sought followers yet. Now people approached him, students, asking to learn, strangers, thanking him, even investors, promising support for initiatives rooted in truth rather than spin. Grace Lan captured every moment, her camera steady, though her heart raced. She knew this story would change lives. Her article was already forming in her mind, not about scandal or spectacle, but about a father who had redefined victory. She caught Mason's eye and gave a subtle nod. He didn't smile, but the flicker of acknowledgement in his gaze was enough. He didn't want the spotlight, but he accepted that the light could no longer be avoided. Later that night, as the rooftop emptied and the city lights stretched like a sea of stars, Juliet approached Mason privately. You've given me back something I thought I'd lost forever, she said. I want to do more than apologize. I want to rebuild, with integrity this time. And I want you to be part of it. Mason shook his head. I'm not a teacher anymore. I'm just a father trying to keep my daughter safe. Juliet hesitated. Maybe. But what you showed tonight was bigger than one fight. It was a lesson this world needs. If not for money, if not for fame, then for people who are searching for balance the way I once was. Mason's eyes softened. He glanced at Maya, who was tugging at his sleeve, humming happily, as though the weight of the evening hadn't touched her. If I ever step into teaching again, he said quietly, it will be to show her and others like her that balance can heal more than fists can break. Juliet nodded, tears threatening again. She extended her hand. Mason hesitated, then shook it not as a contract but as a gesture of mutual respect. Grace closed her laptop in the corner, her live stream finally ending. The numbers had climbed into the hundreds of thousands, comments flooding in from across the world. Who is Mason Reed? When will he teach again? This is the lesson our children need. For once, Grace didn't feel like a journalist chasing headlines. She felt like a messenger delivering truth, and it was the most important story she had ever told. As the last of the crowd dispersed, Mason and Maya stood at the edge of the rooftop. She leaned against him, sleepy now, her small voice barely above a whisper. Daddy, you said you wouldn't fight for pride. You fought for me instead." Mason wrapped his arm around her. "That's the only fight that matters." The wind brushed across the rooftop, carrying the sound of the city below. For the first time in years, Mason felt lighter, not because his burdens were gone, but because he had finally stopped carrying them alone. Redemption hadn't come in the form of victory. It had come in the form of truth. 3 months had passed since proof night, but its echoes still rolled through New York like the memory of a storm that had cleared the air. The rooftop of Zenith Wellness, once a stage for spectacle and deception, now looked entirely different. No banners of dominance, no posters of celebrity trainers. Instead, sunlight bathed rows of simple mats, laid out each morning, where people from every walk of life gathered: security guards, janitors, executives, retirees, even children. And at the center of it all, guiding them with quiet steadiness, was Mason Reed. He wore no uniform, no title. Just a plain shirt, worn sneakers, and the kind of calm presence that drew people to him without effort. He didn't stand on a pedestal. He moved among the group, showing them how to breathe deeply, how to let their weight sink into the earth, how to yield without collapsing to stand, without forcing. His daughter Maya ran among the mats, correcting postures with the playful authority of a 9-year-old who had seen her father do it 100 times. "Not like that," she told a retired firefighter with a grin. "You have to bend your knees, see like Daddy." Laughter rippled across the rooftop. The atmosphere was light, human, free of the rigid pride that had once haunted the space. Juliet May stood at the edge of the rooftop, watching the transformation with quiet awe. She had rebuilt Zenith Wellness from the inside out. Gone were the glossy campaigns, promising perfection. In their place, a new message: balance is for everyone. She had lost some investors in the transition, but she didn't regret it. What she gained was something rarer: authenticity. And it had all begun the night a janitor reminded her that harmony was stronger than spectacle. She walked onto the mat, bowing to Mason with humility that had once been foreign to her. "May I join today?" Mason gave a small nod. "Only if you're willing to forget titles." Juliet smiled. "Then I'll just be Juliet." Grace Lan was there too, notebook in hand, camera hanging loosely around her neck. Her article, "The Invisible Fighter Who Taught Us to Stand," had gone viral across platforms, translated into multiple languages, sparking conversations in schools, community centers, and even veterans groups. She had been offered contracts by major outlets since, but she turned them all down. She wasn't chasing a byline anymore. She was chasing truth. And truth was here on this rooftop, in the slow, steady rhythm of breaths, guided by a single-dad veteran who had once sworn never to teach again. Even Cole Barrett returned. No longer the loud, prideful trainer, he came humbly stripped of bravado. He bowed to Mason before every class, and often stayed after to sweep the mats, a gesture of respect, not punishment. Slowly, students began to trust him again, not as a man of dominance, but as a man learning humility. "Balance isn't weakness," Cole admitted one morning, standing beside Mason as they watched newcomers practice. "It's harder than any punch I've ever thrown." Mason simply nodded. "And worth more than any victory." But the truest victory for Mason wasn't in the applause, the live streams, or the humbled trainers. It was in the quiet moments at home with Maya. Their apartment was still small, the rent still tight, but their nights were filled with laughter stories and drawings of superheroes who didn't punch villains, they helped them stand back up. One evening, as they sat at the kitchen table, Maya looked up at him with her wide, earnest eyes. "Daddy, do you think you'll ever stop teaching?" Now, Mason hesitated, remembering the vow he had made years ago to never fight again, to bury that part of himself forever. But he had learned something new. Teaching wasn't fighting. It was healing. "I'll keep teaching," he said softly. as long as there's someone who needs to remember that balance can change a life. Maya grinned. Then you'll never stop. On the rooftop the following weekend, the gathering was larger than ever. Not just students, but neighbors, journalists, even passers-by who had seen the live stream came to join. The mats stretched wider, the circle broader. Mason guided them through a final form, his voice calm, steady. Root yourself in the ground. Let your breath be the anchor. Yield not to lose, but to preserve. Stand not to dominate, but to support. The crowd moved as one, a wave of harmony under the open sky. Juliet's eyes glistened. Grace's pen stilled. Cole exhaled deeply, shoulders finally at peace. Maya giggled, her small hands mimicking her father's movements. When the form ended, silence lingered, a silence so full it felt like music. Then the wind brushed across the rooftop, carrying the sound of chimes. Juliet stepped forward, bowing once more. "Thank you, Mason," she said, her voice breaking with sincerity, "for reminding us all of what really matters." Mason looked out at the faces before him. Not investors, not critics, not strangers. People. People trying, people learning, people standing together. His voice was quiet, but it carried like a vow. Strength doesn't come from knocking someone down. It comes from helping them stand tall. The rooftop filled with applause, not the shallow applause of spectacle, but the kind that came from hearts, moved lives touched. Maya slipped her hand into her father's, tilting her head toward the sky. "It feels like Mom is clapping too," she whispered. Mason closed his eyes, letting the warmth of the moment wash over him. He didn't need headlines, didn't need recognition. What he had now was greater. A daughter who believed in him, a community healed by balance, and a world reminded that love and restraint were the truest forms of strength. As the camera of Grace Lund clicked one final time, capturing father and daughter beneath the city's endless sky, a single truth resonated through every heart present. Sometimes the most unexpected harmony comes not from power, but from compassion. And in that compassion, the world stands taller. Before you go, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Share your city or country down in the comments. It's always wonderful to see how far our community reaches. If this story touched your heart, make sure to subscribe so you never miss the next one. We have many more inspiring journeys to share together. And most of all, thank you for spending your precious time with us. Your presence here means more than words can say.